What is up, everyone? Brandon Ferst, aka First Report, representing the First Off the Bench podcast network. Everyone comes off the bench. We are first. Welcome into another edition of the NFL Weekly here on the network. We are going to be previewing the AFC North. And folks, we got a very special treat for you all here coming up here in a moment. But before we get into that, let's get rid of some of the particulars. You can find myself at First Report, FERST, and the podcast network at Off the Bench 1-2. Let's get into some of our co-hosts before we get into our special guest. But let's start it off with Coach Brandon Lupian. You can find Coach at Portland 76er. Coach Lupian, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing quite well. I'm quite surprised to see Dr. Steve joining us today. All we need is the Pope, and we're kind of set. But I got the message, or we got the message this morning from Raider Jim. He's going to have a special treat for us, and well, how special it is. How about that? How special it is.
Amen. Yes, yeah. It's very good to have our good friend Dr. Steve back. Raider Jim is also here, the co-host. You can find Raider Jim at Raider Jim 1090. Mr. Martinez, how you doing today, sir?
Hey, like I always say, every week's a great week, especially when the sun's out. I'm in San Diego, and we're going to talk NFL football. Nice to have Doc on board with us tonight. It's like we're getting the old band back together again, so let's rock it out with some NFL talk.
Thanks, James.
Absolutely. Amen. Let me I just had to pull up Dr. Steve's Twitter handle, make sure I knew it off the top of my head. But yeah, it is, of course, our special guest, our Ravens expert, if you will. Of course, we all got started on the Great Friends Sports Network at the mighty 1090, all had our individual teams. Dr. Steve, of course, was the Ravens expert and figured why not bring Dr. Steve into the fold for this one. You can find Dr. Steve at Dr. Steve Albrecht on Twitter. Mr. Albrecht, how you doing today, sir?
I'm well. I'm happy to talk to you guys and see what you have to say about this division. It's going to be a challenging one. I think the Browns are going to make some waves this year. And we'll be coming after my Ravens.
Yeah, I personally just kind of going through this division, I think this could possibly be the most competitive division in all of football. I think it always has had that stigma. Obviously, look, the Ravens and Steelers is that physical rivalry. And the Browns are no longer the clowns. And, you know, even the Bengals, you can find some positive things. That's where we are going to start in the AFC North with the Bengals, who are expected to finish last in the division. They are 22-1 to win the division. Obviously, some very long odds. But I think one of the biggest things with all of these teams in this division, major question marks, and most of them are at the quarterback position. Obviously, with the Bengals, we had glimpses of what we could see from Joe Burrow last year. And when he wasn't running for his life, he looked pretty darn good. Unfortunately, he got caught and his season ended in an unfortunate way, but he is back. Everything we've seen or we've heard, he is ready to roll right out of the gate. But it's going to be a lot of question marks on not only Burrow, his young wide receiver core, but also that offensive line that did not get the help I expected in the draft. But we will start with Dr. Steve. Obviously, look, the Bengals in your division. Do you immediately just chalk up 2 easy wins in the Ravens schedule?
No, I think we make mistakes when we do that because, you know, any given Sunday, those guys can have a good day and beat us. And one of the things about the Ravens just early on is that they have, according to the people that study this stuff, the second most difficult schedule in the NFL. So if you look at how they're going to play, I mean, they've got their back end of their schedule is towards the end of the season. So they don't play a division game until the 6th game of the season. So they've got Bengals twice, Steelers twice, and Browns twice, you know, at the back end of their season. So it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting in that AFC North. A lot of good teams in there. And like I said, even the Bengals. But Raider Jim, what are your thoughts on Cincinnati, their outlook for this year?
Cincinnati, we all know that in pretty much every team, the fans, everybody looks at who's behind the center. If you're behind the center, you are the guy that's going to lead your team to the promised land. And that's how they feel about Joe Burrow. And he was proving himself. He's the real deal. However, The first negative, if you will, when it comes to talking about Joe Burrow is that knee injury. And everybody can say you're fully recovered. Well, fully recovered once you've broken your knee still means you're not at 100%. And what does that do to your ability to perform, to make the cuts, all the workout? I wish him nothing but the best because I think he's good. Unfortunately, when he gets under center, if he is the starter week one, and there was some question a few weeks back on if he would be the starter in week one, but when he does get back under center, how should he be feeling? Because that offensive line is awful. They were awful. I do have notes here on the offensive line. In 2019, they drafted Jonah Williams in the first round. He's had health issues. He's had hard to keep playing. They had Billy Price. He was inconsistent. He was another high pick. He wasn't even a starter. He was inconsistent as a starter. And then they were hoping that during the offseason, they brought in Xavier Su'a-Filo. And as of a week ago, the talk was he's fighting to even make the team, let alone step in and be, the saving grace at guard. So basically they're taking last year's offensive line and putting it right back in front of Joe Burrow, and that doesn't bode well. And regardless, he's the looming question is his knee, is Burrow's knee, and he's going to be the starter either way. And he gives that, as I call it, it's the Phillip Rivers promise of hope to the fan base and to the team. And then my note that I wrote down was Phillip Rivers, by the way, 16 years as a Charger, 1 year with the Colts, and never played in the Super Bowl. And unfortunately, if this is how the Bengals are going to manage the team, this is going to be the foreseeable future for Joe Burrow, but I hope that's not the case. I think this kid deserves better. He's got good backup in the running game. Mixon's going to be back. Mixon and the other gentleman that was back, Giovanni Bernard. Tell you what, that's a potent 1-2 punch. It's not like they're going to make any defensive coordinator lose sleep. But if they can get an offensive line that can get them some openings, there'll be enough diversion to maybe Burrow can hit some of his targets out there. So we'll see what happens. And the defense on the other side of that too. The other thing, you got to have a good defense to make a good quarterback. And the defense is abysmal. They were just awful. There's no other way to put it. And, as frustrated as it is to be a Raider fan and watch the Raider defense, I look at some of these numbers and it just boggles the mind. They dropped like $160,000, $140,000 on 3 guys. One guy tore his pec before the season started last year, so he missed the whole season. Another guy, they paid him $53 million, or his contract is $53 million. He ends up with 8 solo tackles for the entire year. I need a little bit more performance for the money if I'm a fan or if I'm the front office. So we'll see what happens. I just think, the 15,000 to 1 for them to win the Super Bowl might be worth $10. What the heck? But you have to know that's throwaway money because they're not going to win the division or the title.
Yeah, I think they're kind of in the same situation as we talked last week with the Jets. Just improve. I don't think anyone's, expecting a playoff run, a wild card, threatening season deep into the year. Survival could possibly be another word for it for a lot of the fans. I know our good friend Craig Mizrak, I think one of the toughest things for the Bengals and their fan base is the owner. You talk about that money that that they shell out on the defense. You can kind of double that because that money doesn't get splashed around by that owner. So when you get it wrong, it hurts kind of twice as much because wow, if anything, he's going to point to this and say, well, this is why I don't pay these guys, blah, blah, blah. But Coach Lupian, what are your thoughts? I know one little tie-in for you, unfortunately, we do talk about that defense. They did try and at least go after some bit of it and address a need with Trey Hendrickson, who I know you were very high on last year.
Well, yeah, since that great draft by the Saints that got in a Hendrickson and got in a Lattimore and got in, Kamara and, him of all those guys and Ramczyk, who just signed the big deal, him of all those guys was, he was the project guy, and every year you could see his impact. And and what an impact it was last year, second in sacks in the league last year, getting the big contract from the Bengals this offseason, and you think making that move, they're going in the right direction as far as addressing need on this team. But I think as we all saw in the draft, letting a guy like Penei Sewell go, right, then it's kind of like, oh, same old Bengals, because what that did was not only did it impact the health and the future, let's say upright, of a guy like Joe Burrow, right? It also hurts a guy like Joe Mixon. Like, that's a number one running back. And if that line isn't shored up, and if that line's not making those holes for a guy like Mixon and keeping a guy like Joe Burrow standing upright, how is this amazing wide receiver core going to shine? I mean, a guy like Tyler Boyd had a great year. They drafted Jamar Chase. Not that if he would be there, but you still had Taylor Boyd and T. Higgins. And then you don't know what you could do. Find a wide receiver if at least that left tackle position, Sewell is addressed. So Jamar Chase is out of the mix. But now that he's in, it's a nice looking offensive cast, except for that questionable line. So, I agree with your comparison to the Jets. Just get better, just get better. And I'll save my $10 for the Raiders.
Oh, there you go. I don't know if you'll get the value, but you'll definitely get a better opportunity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The passing on Sewell is, while I understand it, I guess somewhat, obviously you want to get weapons. It's kind of like buying the ammunition before you have a gun, putting a supercharger in a car without seatbelts. It's going to go really fast, but you better make sure that you don't make a mistake, because if you do, it's all done and dusted. Now, once again, I think all of us here on the podcast, Joe Burrow is one of those players that we just want to see succeed, or not succeed. But if he doesn't succeed, it's because of what he did, let alone not, a situation of, I kind of go back to a Robert Griffin III. I don't know if he would have been the Hall of Famer we all expected him after year one, but my goodness, maybe if they didn't keep him in that playoff game, he might have been prolonged his career, something like that. Now, obviously, the Bengals go out, get the wide receiver Chase to, once again, bring in some speed. I understand it. But once again, if you can't protect the guy throwing him the ball, the guys catching it don't really matter. But I think even best case scenario, this team, third place, I don't think they're getting any higher than third place. And if they do get third place, I think there's going to be some votes for head coach of the year for Zach Taylor, if that is the case. Dr. Steve, did you have anything you wanted to add on the Bengals?
Yeah, a couple of things, guys. One, we're looking at a 17-game season. We've got guys like Dak Prescott, and we've got Burrow coming off of these horrific knee injuries. Just the wear and tear, just the length of the season now is going to be a factor. And I think some of these quarterbacks, some of these impact players that have been, surgeries and banged up, are going to have a longer season, maybe an issue.
Yeah, agreed. I kind of talked about it a bit last week with Josh Allen. As impressive of a stat it is that he has more rushing touchdowns than Ezekiel Elliott over the last 2 or 3 years, you're one bad. I mean, as an Eagle fan, believe me, you're one bad tackle away from everything kind of falling apart. And that's where he puts himself in. And a lot of these quarterbacks do now. And you also have to question whether or not it changes the way Joe Burrow plays football. Is he not as aggressive, or is he maybe a little more timid back there? And hey, maybe that was what made Joe Burrow Joe Burrow. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, the extra game, great for the fans, great for the gamblers, but I think the players are kind of looking at it, wondering how they can talk out of one mouth about player safety and the other say, hey, we need you to suit up for one more Sunday for us, by the way. Moving on to up the division, or at least up the expected order of finish in the division, it is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Very similar to the Cincinnati Bengals, a lot of question marks, and mainly at the quarterback position, obviously for different reasons. One quarterback probably on his way out, but wondering, if Ben Roethlisberger has enough in the tank. We talked last week or over the last, few months about Drew Brees maybe on his way out. There were some situations, arm strength, not throwing the ball deep. Ben Roethlisberger, I believe, averaged 7 yards a throw last year. That's just, in this era of stretch the game, it's almost archaic in a way. But we went to Dr. Steve last for the Bengals. So we'll start with you, Dr. Steve. What are your thoughts on a team that I don't think you're very fond of?
So one thing about the Steelers is that we know that Roethlisberger can take a pounding because of his size and his strength, and he can take abuse back there. But then there's the other side of that coin, which is he's been taking abuse for his entire career. A lot of sacks. He's not the most mobile guy. He's lost a little weight, which looks okay for them. I'm not the biggest fan of Haskins, just based on his sort of off the field antics and whatnot. So I don't know if they have a great number 2 in him. I mean, if he's done the studying, is he another Jim? I don't even want to talk about, is he another Jamarcus Russell in terms of the great potential, but no follow through in terms of the actual game. So I think, it's going to be a lot on Juju Smith-Schuster, and they're going to move the ball around. Tomlin's a great coach, but I just think, this is going to be Roethlisberger's swan song, and he's either going to go out, in a sort of a mediocre way, or he's going to make a run for it. And I just don't see them doing very much in terms of the season. I think he's going to be out of gas by the end of it.
Yeah. So if he can survive it or, get through it healthy, obviously the last few years, it's not been easy for him to get through it for a guy that, for the first 12 years of his career did not miss a game outside of, being sat for health or not health reasons, just rest in those situations. We'll go to you, Raider Jim. What are your thoughts, Pittsburgh Steelers?
Yeah, Roethlisberger is the topic of the team, and we all know that. Last year, going into the season, it was in Green Bay. Everybody was talking about Aaron Rodgers is done. This is going to be Aaron Rodgers last year. And look, he's still, not only is he still the top of the conversation line in Green Bay, but he's still around, and he had a fantastic year last year. Wasn't his decision to go for a field goal in that playoff game, and that was the difference between them being in the Super Bowl and Tampa Bay, in my estimation. So when it comes to Pittsburgh, here's what I think. I think that Rodgers and Roethlisberger are of the same, cut from the same cloth in a way, and that is from that competitive cloth. We know Roethlisberger is a competitor. We know that on the cerebral side of things, he knows the game. And he's not going to lie to himself. He's not going to try to market himself and end up with another team next year. So he wants to go out with the bang. Victory for Roethlisberger and the Steelers is going to be if they're challenging for a wild card with 5 weeks left. And that I think they'll do. I think because of the way he's going to come out, take a deep breath and one more time hit the field for he's got to do it 18 weeks, as Doc pointed out. But if he can do it, I think he's going to have a great swan song, perform better than what most people think. I see them a strong third place in a 4-team division, but beyond that, there's not going to be any Pittsburgh miracles taking place.
But if he gets hurt, then and we're not confident with asking with backup, right? I mean, we're just not, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And that was great for you to bring up, Dr. Steve, the Dwayne Haskins signing, I think they signed him after his unceremonious exit there out of the soon to be renamed football team as well. I believe next year, apparently they will be rebranded, but anyways, one more year with the football team. But for Dwayne Haskins, you obviously brought up the comparison of, I'm going to do it one more time, Raider Jim, I apologize, but the Jamarcus Russell, the comparison. And what I always think about when you hear about quarterbacks that, maybe their team wants them to study more is the Jamarcus Russell story of them sending him home on the weekend with the tape and telling him, all right, break down the film or, tell us what you think. He comes in and he goes, yeah, it was great. I learned a lot, blah, blah, blah. It was a blank tape. They realized he didn't watch anything. And that's a problem because there are a lot of times where in all sports, until you get to the professional level, your just God-given talent can get it done. Not at the NFL level, not at most professional levels. You need to put in the work. Does the fact, like Raider Jim brought up, Big Ben, very cerebral, has a football mind. Does Dwayne Haskins maybe buy into that? He never really, with all due respect to Alex Smith, Alex Smith was worried about or focusing on rehabbing from a horrific knee injury. He wasn't able to be the mentor, if you will. Can Ben Roethlisberger do that? Does he want to do that? Who knows? Because I'm the same way. I still feel when that draft happened a couple years back, I felt Dwayne Haskins was the best quarterback in that draft. Now, I was wrong on a lot of levels, but I don't think he's as bad as what we've seen. And like I said, maybe Ben Roethlisberger kind of giving him that fatherly, although I don't know if I would ever want Ben Roethlisberger to be considered fatherly, but at least call him football father advice. Yeah. Keep it to the gridiron. And then he talks about life. Don't listen to him then. But we'll go to you, Coach Lupian. What are your thoughts on those Pittsburgh Steelers?
You know, a pretty nice defense. You know, they've addressed it the last couple of years prior this year in the draft. They got a guy like TJ Watt on the edge. I mean, Cameron Hayward inside. Devin Bush has been a baller, even though he's coming off of an injury. And then I think the key to that defense the last couple of years is bringing in a guy like Mika Fitzpatrick from Miami a couple of years back. Like, that shored up a whole lot in that secondary that was a glaring hole and weakness that was being exposed. So that defense is pretty tight, and that's going to keep them in the game a lot. As far as Haskins goes, yeah, he still has to beat out Mason Rudolph for that number 2 spot. And there's, you know, there's the old saying, any news is good news, even bad news. You know, Dwayne Haskins is going to deal with a domestic charge that he charged his girl or whatever. So there's always going to be some kind of like negative energy following this guy around. And hopefully it doesn't trickle down into the locker room. But if he doesn't see this as his last chance under Mike Tomlin, then, you know, too bad. But as we talk,
Brandon, he's got 2 capers. He's got the girl that punched out one of his teeth, and then he's got the other girl who's some sort of social media chick that he wants his $20,000 back from. So there's a couple of them on the ringer there.
Yeah, so it's a mess already, and I think Mason is just like, I got 2 locked up, you know, other than playing golf with his girlfriend out here in San Diego when he's out. You know, he's got no issues other than getting ready for training camp. But, you know, we had a post-draft show, and I expressed how I like the pick of Najee Harris and how that guy fits in well in this Steelers way or Steelers program. And I actually said he's going to be – the question was, well, who was going to win the Rookie of the Year? Trevor Lawrence. And I actually said this guy because the opportunities they're going to present for him to showcase his skill set. So I'm kind of excited more or less to see him on the offensive end versus a Steelers kind of win-loss record. I could really care less about how they do as a team. But, you know, my money's on Najee because of that show, and I'm trying to play – profit, not false profit.
Guys, one little Steeler Ravens issue here. Alejandro Villanueva left the agent, so he's over at the Ravens now as an offensive tackle. And I like the guy just because of his, you know, patriotism and his stance on things. And I think he's still got some play in him, and I think he's going to fit in fine. You know, he's got a little Steelers grudge now that he's with the Ravens.
Yeah, no, great point. Huge loss for the Steelers, huge pickup for the Ravens, because whether it's his physical ability to stay on the field, it's the knowledge of the system, it's the knowledge in the division, and it's the knowledge that he's going to pass down to those other guys, kind of like, you know, they're hoping Big Ben will be Big Brother, you know, in a very physical, very strong division that is dictated most of the time by offensive and defensive line play.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, Villanueva, obviously. And they're, you know, most teams, you know, will maybe switch things up with coordinators here or there. I feel like the Steelers have pretty much ran the same offense and the same defense for the last 10, 15 years. I mean, I actually had to look up to see if Dick LeBeau was still the defensive coordinator because, you know, it's still that 3-4, get after the quarterback. If you beat us over the top, you beat us over the top. But you know what? We have faith in our defensive pass rushers and those corners to play one-on-one. And look, this team, a lot of people forget that this team started 11-0. Mm-hmm. And I think universally, nobody really, took them. They probably were the most, I guess, overlooked 11-0 team. I don't think I ever saw anybody debate whether or not this team was going 16-0. Everyone just kind of knew, wow, this team's been really lucky. And I think they finished 12-4. And the only reason they got one win is that might have been the Dolphins game late, where the Dolphins had some boneheaded mistakes, or else they would have lost 5 in a row. And then obviously into the playoffs, where the next team we're going to be talking about exercised some demons. Cleveland Browns, obviously a franchise that, is in the bottom tier for sure. When you have a guy or a mannequin wearing a jersey of 35 different quarterbacks, you're probably going to be in for a rough time. But the Browns exercised some demons by not only making the playoffs last year, but taking care of business against the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh in the playoffs. That I don't think can be overstated enough for that fan base. At the very least, hopefully the team as well, but at least for that fan base, they can look back at that and say, you know what, for at least 60 minutes, we were better than this team by a lot, and when it really mattered the most. But we'll start with you, Raider Jim. What are your thoughts, Cleveland Browns?
I'll tell you, when I sat down and started putting together notes for the AFC North, I knew where I was going to have the Bengals. I knew where I was going to have the Steelers. And I thought it was hands down the Ravens were going to be the only real game in town, and there were going to be no worries. Then I started doing some in-depth look at the Cleveland Browns, and oh my, that's a pretty decent ball club out there. Start again with the guy behind the center, Mayfield. Mayfield proved he's the guy. He had a quarterback rating over 80 in 8 games last year. There was only 2 other quarterbacks that did that, Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers. So that's not bad company. That's not a bad list for a young guy like that to put his name on that list. The offensive line is going to be returning every starter to the offensive line. And not only is that impressive and promising, but when it comes right down to it, the 5 starters combined total only had 8 healthy games, which means that they've got a lot of depth on the offensive line. And when you've got to have depth, if you go back and listen to some of the things I said going into the Super Bowl and the playoffs and things like that, your offensive line is hurt. You're going to see what happens. And that's what happened to the Chiefs in the Super Bowl eventually. So they're bringing back the line. The receiving corps, Odell Beckham Jr., like him or dislike him, coming back from the injury. And I think his knee really is at 100%. And from what they're saying, as far as his workouts and his training, he's not missing a beat. So there's a receiving corps. And then it's just like, so the more I'm reading, I was like, wow. Then I got to the running game. Nick Chubb missed 4 games and still racked up over 1,000 yards. And Kareem Hunt, 800 yards. Really? That's 2 guys, 1,800 yards, and one of them was out for 4 games. So they have the potential with the strong offensive line and everybody's healthy and there's no COVID in the air. You could see these guys both get 1,000 yards this year. And all of a sudden, the level of competition between Cleveland and the Ravens has really kind of evened out, in my estimation, at least on the offensive side of the ball. And on the defensive side, Cleveland's got a great line. They got great interior guys on the defensive line. They got Clowney on the outside, Myles Garrett on the outside, on the edges. This is going to be some must-see TV when the Browns and the Ravens meet. Doc, I don't know if you feel the same, or if you've seen, maybe am I not seeing something, or am I missing something that's lacking in the Browns game?
Well, certainly the tale of 2 seasons for them last year. First game of the season, Ravens, Cleveland, we beat them 38-6. Second game, 47-42. So Baker really stepped up. I like to call him Baker, the interception maker, because he just gets on my nerves. But he's talented, and I think what he has, he's kind of not a big physical guy, but he's scrappy as all get out. He has a lot of heart. I mean, he has weapons, and Chubb is one of them. I'm interested to see what happens in terms of their receiving core. I mean, we know they're good, and which Odell comes back and from injury and that. And also, I always question, how Odell is when he's not getting the ball. He's not getting a lot of catches and things. That's interesting to me. I think, Cleveland is well coached. I think the heart factor with Baker is a big issue. I think if Chubb stays healthy, like you said, Jim, I mean, he was not 100% the entire season. The guy's still a baller. So, I worry about Cleveland. The first game, we trounced them. Second game, it was real close, and that could happen again next year, because I think they gear up for us and we gear up for them.
Yeah. The other thing about Mayfield, he's young, but he obviously has the game. He shows that he's got the game and he knows how to play the game. But he's got a great relationship with the coach in the locker room, off season, during the season, between Sundays, and most importantly, or just as important, of course, during the game. They have a great level of communication with one another, and that's going to pay dividends the more they're together. Chuck Noll, Terry Bradshaw. In the beginning, they hated each other. Chuck Noll didn't want anything to do with Terry Bradshaw until Terry Bradshaw went one day and said, "Pat me on the ass once, and let's see what happens." And all of a sudden, there you are, 4 rings later.
I would agree.
It's definitely, obviously, culture has changed, expectations have changed. Obviously, players and front office have changed in Cleveland, but that is a franchise now that can at least look, Baker Mayfield, I think he has one thing that none of those other previous quarterbacks had. And Raider Jim, you brought it up, a real top-notch run game, because obviously, Kareem Hunt, we all know what he can do. He is explosive. He's not an in-between the runners type of guy. He can be if you need him to, but that's where the Chubb factor comes in, because he is that guy. He can do it all. I think outside of the guy named Derrick Henry, I would put Chubb right there, right behind him. And there's Dalvin Cooks out there, Ezekiel Elliott, I understand that, but Chubb last year was not only dynamic at times, but overall consistent when he was in. Out of running backs, I would prefer you averaging 120, 125 yards a game rather than your 200-yard games a year, which are going to, blow up your team's fantasy. But guess what? Head coaches don't give a crap about fantasy, and fans don't really either when it comes to their team. I think most people would take a team win over a fantasy football team win, unless you're, in the big money leagues. But anyways, Coach Lupian, what are your thoughts on the Cleveland Browns?
There was a lot of questions about what this team was going to be those first 4 weeks prior to Chubb returning. And once he did return, that solidified a lot of what they were doing scheme-wise. And it took the ball out of Baker's hands, where he was making some questionable decisions early on. And it just kind of toned everything down. And it allowed the ball to be in Chubb's hands the majority of the time, and just kind of balance out of sorts, throwing and running attempts for Baker. And I think that more than anything else kind of brought that young quarterback back into the fold, confidence-wise and trusting-wise with the head coach. You heard the scores between game 1 with the Ravens and then game 2 with the Ravens. And I do believe game 1 was without a Nick Chubb. Game 2 was with a Nick Chubb. And I think looking at both teams and kind of comparing quarterbacks and comparing names, in my mind, it's going to come down to who has the ball last again, who's going to win that game. But bringing a guy like Jadeveon Clowney in the offseason maybe kind of shores up some things for late game heroics, one quarterback or another. So, I've never been a Odell Beckham guy, but when he's on, he's on. I've always liked Jarvis Landry. Nick Chubb was another guy that I've always liked. But other than that, there's not too many other names that I could really say, oh yeah, I'm really hot on that guy one way or another. Not even Baker. Baker's Baker, and I love his antics. Was he doing that right now? Down horn?
They're not allowed to anymore, by the way. Yeah. The Big 12 has completely outlawed the horns down. So
he's been hot on that for the last week and a half. So, you know, that's Baker being Baker, and that's that moxie that you want in a quarterback, especially when the ball's in your hand at the end of the game. You know, you need that kind of moxie, and he's shown that in a young career. You know, he's a gamer, and you know, they made a great run into the playoffs. So yeah, I other than that, you know, it's,
you know, guys, I get a little Phillip Rivers kind of a flashback with Baker, especially when he's in a lot of pressure. He flings the ball, so he'll throw it into traffic. He'll make bad-footed, you know, off his back foot throws, and so especially at the end of the game, I think there's a worry that sometimes he's desperate to win. The guy wants to win, there's no question, and he flings the ball kind of like Phillip Rivers started to do at the end of his career. It's a concern.
I agree. I think it was his draft day or whatever. He recreated the pose or whatever picture of Brett Favre. That was his idol growing up, and it shows. He is a gunslinger. If
Absolutely.
Baker Mayfield plays another 15 years or whatever he does, like Brett Favre, he will break Brett Favre's interception record. There's nothing really more you can say, because he is the true out-and-out gunslinger. Somebody that, like you said, he's going to sling it up there, and if it gets picked off, it gets picked off. But you know what? He went out and he tried, and that was, you know, one thing with Phillip Rivers, obviously, as well here in San Diego when they were here. There were a lot of people frustrated with it, but as somebody who, you know, the competitor in me, it's always nice to see at least going for it. Obviously, certain throws probably don't need to be made. And I think for him, he has the added pressure. This is going to sound kind of crazy, but, you know, if he throws an interception and they go to commercial, more than likely it's a Baker Mayfield commercial on NFL Sunday. So you got the fan base who's going to be cussing him out for throwing that pick, and then watching him in some nationwide commercial joking about how the stadium is his house or something like that. So
with his hot wife.
Yeah. So yeah, congratulations. Baker is definitely a winner off the field. And I love his antics. I think he is somebody that can back it up. And he got humbled a bit over the last few years. Definitely after his first year, he realized, hey, I'm not going to plant my flag in the NFL like I did in college. But he humbled up. And for all accounts, he is a great football mind. But he's just like Raider or Dr. Steve said, maybe a little of that gunslinger mentality, but it's worked for him to get him here. So it's hard to try and get somebody to change when they've gotten this far. But moving on to, of course, the team that Bovada and I believe most experts in Vegas expect to win. It's only a plus 115 number. The Browns were plus 150. So pretty much splitting hairs, splitting a couple bucks between these two. But the Baltimore Ravens are expected to win this division. Dr. Steve, what are your thoughts on your beloved Ravens?
So a couple things. One, you guys have talked about it. It's all about the quarterback. And the big focus is going to be with Lamar passing the ball more, not running so much, not trying to do so much himself, not trying to carry the entire team. So we got Sammy Watkins from the Chiefs. He's a veteran wide receiver. That's going to be a big improvement. Our first draft, as you guys talked about in your draft show, Rashad Bateman, 6'1", 190, tough wide receiver. He has got really long arms. He can grab the ball. That remains to be seen. It's got to be Hollywood Brown's, Marquise Brown's go-to season. He's got to step up. I mean, he complained about not getting the ball last year in key situations. So when you look at the wide receivers, it's going to be kind of a, Watkins and everybody else. We're going to do running back by committee. Gus Bradley got a huge contract, and it's going to be running back by committee and receiver by committee, but it's all going to be, two things, as you guys all know. One is the choices that Lamar makes to on the run pass option, or is he going to step up and start throwing the ball? And the second issue is obviously his health. I mean, we had the miraculous comeback when he came limping in from the sidelines in the end of the season there, but long season, I worry about the guy. Their second draft choice was an outside linebacker, Odafe Owen. The guy is pretty stout, 6'5", 257. He gets after it. He's not a big sack guy, but they expect him to do a lot, especially on third down. And then their third guy is just sort of one of those cartoon characters that shows up in the NFL.
I'm president of his fan club.
Which one?
Ben Cleveland.
Oh, yeah, Ben Cleveland. Okay, 6'6", 350. The guy blocks out the sun when he walks around back there. And he's one of those I remember talking to a buddy of mine who played college football at Long Beach, and he said, one time he played against he was a defensive end. He played against this offensive tackle that used to just manhandle him. He said, most of the times these guys are pretty passive. They just pass block, but Cleveland's one of those guys who's going to go out and knock people over. So at that size, I'm interested to see what's going to happen. He failed the conditioning test today for the Ravens. The Ravens conditioning test, guys, is notoriously difficult. It's a 900-yard run that you have to do in segments of 75 yards each, out and back, 75 yards times 12 to get to 900. He failed it, so he's going to have to come up with that. If I look at their schedule, they've got a tough one. I mean, they've got some, games like Miami at Miami, but they play the Chargers in Baltimore, the Rams in Baltimore, and obviously the Steelers twice. They're going to be on Monday night with Jim's Raiders, the first game. They play 2 Monday night games, once against the Colts, once against the Raiders, and they play a Thursday night game at Miami. So it's interesting to look at their schedule. They don't play a division game until the 7th week of the season. I mean, they're playing the Broncos and Colts, Chargers, Bengals. Is the Bengals the first one? We play Lions, but they got the Chiefs right after the Raiders. So it's a really tough schedule. When I look at the stuff that they're doing, running back Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, great. Marquise Brown, Sammy Watkins is going to be the leader from the Chiefs. They got a really young receiving core, and that's going to be, Miles Boykin. That's going to be run by Watkins as the leader. Tight end is Mark Andrews. He's a Pro Bowler. He can play with Nick Boyle. I talked about Villanueva at the offensive tackle position. Patrick Queen is kind of the leader of their linebacking core now. Marlon Humphrey is another Pro Bowler, is the leader of their defensive backs. Chuck Clark has been there like 12 years. Marcus Peters, we got him from the Rams. So we've got some improvements in the defense. We got Derek Wolfe from Denver as well at defensive end. So that's another improvement. And then, of course, we have the best kicker in the history of football, which is Justin Tucker. They got rid of their long snapper, which is sort of weird. We got a new one of those guys, but our punter, Sam Cook's the same. So, in terms of special teams, I think they're up there. And that may win them those late Cleveland games, those late Pittsburgh games, especially at the end of the season. I'm a big Lamar fan. I think they put a lot onto this kid's shoulders. He's going to renegotiate his own contract. I wouldn't be surprised by the end of camp that he gets a new contract that's, equivalent to a step under a Patrick Mahomes and, maybe definitely a step up from like a Prescott. But I think he's going to get a big pile of bucks. I worry, when I watch him, make bad throws near the end zone. Sometimes in the red zone, I think he doesn't make the best choices in terms of his passes. I just want him to be healthy. If he's healthy, I think we win the division and we go to the playoffs. No problem.
Any outlook on the changes with the offensive line, and not changes as in names and personnel, but shifting them around to changing their positions?
Well,
I think they had a kid that was a guard. His natural position was center, and now they're going to put him back at being center. It just sounds to me like they're making good moves in that respect.
Yeah, the only, I don't know what happened with the Orlando Brown situation. He got sort of, bent out of shape and left the club. We have sort of musical centers. I mean, I think about we had the kid that's on Tampa Bay now, Ryan. He's Brady's center. We had him as our center. The kid was a fighter and a tough guy, gets lots of penalties. He got out of the system somehow, and so we've been playing musical offensive lineman. Jim, as you're right. I think we have a lot of continuity with Harbaugh, with Martindale, our in the coaching staff. I think defensively and offensively, there's a lot of continuity between those guys. I think the guys like playing for Harbaugh a lot. The last couple of seasons, we've had this fade out. We lose to the Titans 2 years ago, and it is heartbreaking. We had the best record in football, 14-2, we lose to the Titans. So when we look at our playoffs, it sort of reminds you how painful football can be when you go so close and one game in the entire season and it's over and other teams move on. So, if we keep Lamar healthy and upright, he makes better choices. He doesn't try to carry the entire game, the entire team on his back all the time. I think we'll be fine. We have great pass defense. We have pretty aggressive linebackers. I think we're going to get after it. So
how about the guy you lost on the outside in the linebacking core?
I can't remember his name.
Matt Judon, I think it is.
Oh, Judon, yeah. We've had some guys go, and I don't know what's a money thing or what, but we've had a lot of guys go, and that's why our number 2 choice was picking up a linebacker, with Owen, because he gets after it, and I'm keen to see how they're going to fit him in. I think the schedule is really going to be an issue with the Ravens in terms of how much juice they have left in the tank when they got to play all those division games at the end of the season.
Definitely something keep an eye on there. Kind of those, I feel like every team probably in each conference has to, especially with an extra game, everyone's kind of got to have, there's that one team that looks at the schedule and goes, wow, either a month on the road or, like you said, playing 4 division games in 5 weeks, the last 5 weeks where anything can kind of happen. But Coach Lupian, what are your thoughts on the expected division champs, the Baltimore Ravens?
Yeah, Dr. Steve really touched on the expectations, the higher expectations of a Lamar Jackson after his rookie year. I mean, what a year. And then following it up the way he did. I mean, this is still a team that was there. I think if they shored up their running back game, things would become a little bit easier for Lamar. I do like the Rashad Bateman draft. That was the guy that I was really targeting for my Saints this year. And then, last year they pick up a guy like Patrick Queen that we passed up on, and he leads them in tackles. I mean, Patrick Queen is the real deal. He will be the face of that defense, if not now, in the future. But then they got a guy like Calais Campbell, the wily vet who
like 13 years in the league, 15 years in the league, something like that. I mean, he's been around.
He just shores up that interior of the line. And I've always been a fan of his since his time in Arizona. And then he's bounced around a bit, and he's always been that consistent veteran big brother. And he's got a great character. He's got a great voice. He's got a great demeanor about him. And then there's a guy like Peters who's had trouble in his past that they acquired, but he's a game changer. So, there's a whole lot of reasons for this team to be favored to win this division. And you touched on a lot of them. Alejandro Villanueva, that's a great pickup, And then Mark Andrews, one of the best tight ends in the league. Justin Tucker, except when he plays my Saints, he's vulnerable or non-vulnerable. So he could be great against the rest of the league, just not my Saints. And that's what's been happening for him the last couple of seasons. So, this is another team that is going to come back, and they're going to do it the Raider way. Harbaugh's going to get them to a position at the end of the year to be that team coming into the playoffs, and just a lot to look up to for this team, because everyone's going to want to see the rebound that Lamar's going to make. And you hit it, his health, most importantly. I think when he got away from getting loose and running, so it kind of just pulled back the rest of his game, So, health for him, being able to kind of be an athlete and creative on the offensive side, and being able to extend drives, being able to, and I'm not a stat guy, but you let me know what their third down ratio was. I bet you it was better his rookie year than it was his second year.
I was going to say that you're exactly right, because I think in his rookie year, he just tried to get to the edge and turn the corner, which he could do because he was fast.
Yeah.
And second year, he said, I'm going to try to bust it in the middle and bust it, around before I get to the edge, try to bust it in. And that's when he got knocked down a lot. Yeah. And so I think that was the issue where he's trying to do too much and go, you can't get to the edge, get down to the ground and let's get to the next play.
Right. Absolutely. So, Dr. Steve, I'm going to step out. It was great seeing you.
Thanks, Brandon.
I'm going to get back on the road. But you guys have a good rest of your show.
Thanks, Coach.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Coach, for all your input and that as well. We'll go to you, Raider Jim. What are your thoughts on the Baltimore Ravens?
Well, I think between Doc and I, again, I wasn't kidding. I went on cruise control, listened to what he said, and I knew he would give me opportunity to ask my questions that I had about the team. And I would say just this about Jackson. Everybody knows how good he is and that he can carry the team. But the feeling that, man, this is my responsibility. I have to make the play. I have to make the play. I would sit him down every day and say, and show him pictures on his locker of Hollywood Brown, Miles Boykin, Devane Duvernay, and then Sammy Watkins, and say, you don't have to do it by yourself. Look at what you got there. And I mean, again, the addition of Sammy Watkins, holy cow, that's a game changer to me. That really, really is that offensive line. And then what do you say about a defense that barely gave up 18 points a game and held the opposing teams to 330 yards. Well, all you guys got to do is hit the end zone 3 times and you win. And they've got the tools to do that. So again, I think it's going to be great must-see TV when the Browns play the Ravens this year. But that 115, it's not a plus 115 isn't going to make you a ton of money on a short bet, but it's a safe bet. And I'm going to take that all day long. They're going to win the division.
Yeah, Bovada, I think at the moment they'll give you if you can pick the top 2 teams, and I think the Ravens Browns or Browns Ravens, you'll get it either plus 240 or plus 220, kind of depending on who you think is going to end up there. And I think that's a pretty safe bet. Like I said, third place, I think we all expect the Steelers, but don't sleep on the Bengals because it could go south for the Steelers quickly.
Yeah.
If they're relying on Dwayne Haskins or Mason Rudolph early on with another Roethlisberger injury, Juju will start focusing on his TikToks rather than maybe the NFL Sunday game plan he's got going his way. But back to the Ravens and just my thoughts on it. I felt like a couple years back, the Ravens, obviously, Lamar Jackson, MVP season, maybe the most impressive single player season, at least from the quarterback position I'd ever seen. They get ousted in the playoffs. And I think they kind of looked and went, you know what, as great as that was, we need to implement maybe a little more passing. And they did that, but I think they overcorrected way too much. It's kind of the Goldilocks thing, right? A little too firm, too soft. Well, hopefully this year is that, okay, we got it just right, because Raider Jim, you brought it up. Those wide receivers, they've got the fact that Sammy Watkins almost is kind of an afterthought with some of these players. I mean, I could see Lamar Jackson and Hollywood Brown at their pinnacle being right there with Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill for explosiveness, because I could make even the case that maybe Marquise Brown is maybe more explosive than Tyreek Hill. Maybe not faster, but more explosive because of what he can do, mainly with what Lamar can do as well. But I do think Greg Roman's got to find that kind of sweet spot, wherever that is, in terms of balancing Lamar's fantastic ability to show off his athletic feats, but then also be able to know, okay, if we go behind 14-0 early on, we can drop back and throw the football in a more rhythm-based passing attack rather than, you talked about the moving pieces on the offensive line. If those offensive linemen have to go into a situation where, 50-60% of the time the pocket moves the minute the ball is snapped to help Lamar Jackson get out of the pocket or do things like that, that's going to hurt down the road. Unless everyone can stay healthy. If everyone can stay healthy on that offensive line, great. That's fantastic. Yeah. But I think we've seen, that doesn't happen. Right. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, for the Ravens, it's a good problem to have. I think a lot of teams would sign up gladly to have a bit of a conundrum that is Lamar Jackson behind center. I'll be the first one to admit he has far surpassed my expectations of what I expected from him coming out of college. I really did not ever expected an MVP from him. He's already done that. And, you can make the case he is the most electrifying player in football when he is, if that makes sense. But with guys, that,
guys, I have a question for it, which is at the end of some of these games where these teams are up by a substantial amount of points, and you see them still going out there with their star quarterback. It drives me crazy. I often have that conversation. Why is Lamar still in the game? I know Brady and those guys want to win. They want to take every snap. But I'm like, that's the other thing I'm looking at Harbaugh this year, which is if we're up and we're up big, put in McSorley and let's just get busy and think about our next game plan. I don't want this guy getting, somebody falling on him, screwing up our whole season in the fourth quarter when it's not necessary.
And do you think there's going to be more of a platooning approach with the additional game? Making it an 18 weeks?
I think we're going to have to see that because the wear and tear on these guys. I mean, look at these teams that are going to play these Thursday games, and it's just ridiculous. Quick story. I met Willie Lanier, who was the Chiefs Hall of Fame linebacker. Nice. He was I was at a dinner with him. He was on the NFL competition committee. He said the NFL actually came to the committee and said, how many games do you think we can get? Can we play on Wednesdays? Can we play on Tuesdays? I'm like, are you crazy? You're going to kill these guys. And I mean, the NFL wanted to, schedule more than they have now. And wow. they won. I mean, they got a 17th game. So,
yeah, I think the Thursday games are Ridiculous. Brutal. Now, don't get me wrong. I tune in every Thursday night, but for the sport, and I think for the entity, is that really the game you want to get started? Throw in a Saturday night game, whatever. A college football might get a little mad, but you know what? People are still going to watch Alabama LSU if it's on, whatever. But Thursday, it's way too much. I felt like with this extra game, I was under the impression if they were going to do an extra game, they would make it a 19-week season and give players or give the teams 2 byes. I had also heard, now this would have been a little more difficult to deal with, but, play 17 or 18 games, but each player can only play in 16, meaning they'd have to sit out 2. Now, when do you sit Tom Brady, things like that. That's a whole nother thing, but it's hard for me to listen to a league talk about player safety and then continue to throw these players into kind of the gauntlet that is what was already a very difficult season. You don't see too many non-quarterbacks really get through 16 games a year. Everyone by week 4 or 5 is just kind of, if you're in, you're hurt. You're not injured, but you're hurt. Everyone's playing hurt by week 4 or 5, maybe even earlier than that. But the last question I will have for you, Dr. Steve, myself, last year, obviously, look, 2020, no one wants to go through that again. But for the sports scene, I looked at it that obviously the NFL, the only one that for the most part wasn't disrupted schedule-wise, didn't have fans, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But there were no preseason games. Now, me, as a bettor, as a fan of football, I cannot believe how much I missed those games because I was unable to, it's hard week 1. Week 1 is already the hardest week to figure out. But week 1 without preseason, where you're scrambling to figure out who these guys are, and then they're putting up 150 yards a game. So I'm just wondering, do you think the preseason will have a positive or negative effect overall for the NFL this year?
I think, with a 3-game preseason schedule, you're going to get what you always get, which is the stars are not going to play, and you're going to get the guys that are the second and third stringers, and you're going to get the guys that are going to fill out your special teams, and the guys on the bubble. And that's what's, the preseason was always about. You had sort of a showcase from some of these guys, but now we're not even doing that. I mean, you look at, LaDainian in his heyday wouldn't play in the preseason. I don't think Amar took a snap in the preseason, Rivers, that type of stuff. I'm okay with that. I think the preseason, I don't watch the preseason. I think it's for the coaches. It's not for the fans.
Yeah. And also, we don't judge anyone on this podcast, but if you bet preseason football, we will judge you 100%. But with that, we'll go with our final thoughts. Raider Jim, final thoughts.
This was great, wasn't it? It was a great rundown on the AFC North. So good to see you back online, Doc. Hope you'll be able to join us again every now and then.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Or whenever you want.
You guys doing a heck of a job. I appreciate listening to your expertise, since you know so much about the sport, and there's just so many intricacies you got to pay attention to, and you guys do it.
Amen. It's great to get the band back together, look, enjoy what we're doing here rather than maybe just endure it in certain situations, but on to bigger and better things. And once again, thank you all so much for listening. Huge shout out, Dr. Steve. Thank you so much for taking the time, gracing us with the Ravens knowledge, because like Raider Jim said, we could kind of put it in. Now I did my whole, homework over here, and then I saw Dr. Steve pop in and I went, okay, well, I'm going to just delete my Raven stuff because I won't need it. We got the expert in the chat, if you will, but always a pleasure. Dr. Steve, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it, and look forward to talking with you this year.
Amen. And with that, thank you all so much for listening to the NFL Weekly AFC North Preview Edition presented by the First Off the Bench Podcast Network. Everyone comes off the bench. We are first. It is time for you all to go wash your hands and stop hating everybody. We'll talk to you all very soon. Take care.
Peace out.